the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, I just thank you. Bless your name. Give you praise. Give you the glory. Thank you for everything you are doing in our life. Thank you for your blessings, O Lord.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the 5-month training in front-end web development. This should be the 5th class. But in respect of the missing recording, we will consider this as the fourth class. I hope we are practicing, studying, and checking up on the courses so far. If we are, that's good to know. I would encourage us to do better. Practice brings about improvement, which means the more we practice, the better we get. Okay. I would like to open today's class with questioning. Even if today's class will be focusing on CSS Fundamentals, I would like to know from our own perspective, do we have any question regarding the previous classes, or we made a personal research and there are some things that are unclear to you and you would like me to shed more light on? I would like to hear them now. Anybody?
Good afternoon, Raymond.
Yeah, Captain, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, you promised to send us HTML5 cheat sheets.
Okay, yes. I sent you a message. I have a long week this week.
Oh, okay. I haven't read
So
it.
please,
No problem.
I'll work on all of that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? Please, this class is all about collaboration. Please, if you're going to want you to put yourself.
Yes, boss.
Thank you. So, with regard to the last class, we did the fundamentals of HTML, understanding what the basics, things that are needed when you're working with HTML. In today's class, we'll be focusing on CSS. Now, to start the class properly, I will come to file. I will create a new project file because I want each of these classes source code to be different. Equally, I will send it to the Google Classroom so that everybody, regardless of your location, you can have access to it. You can go it again. Just go through them and build yours. So let me start by opening a folder, and in between here, I will create a new folder. The very minute I click on new folder, a folder creation will pop up, and while it pops up, all I need to do is to type in 02 underscore CSS, because in this class we will focus mostly on just CSS. So let's press OK and select. In our previous classes, we talked about the fundamentals of HTML, as HTML is the building block of a website. We use it for creating structure to a website. Now, what is CSS? Going back to the notes being provided, if you need this note, just go to the classroom, the Google Classroom, the note is there. Please do not hesitate to ask any question at any point. So in the classroom here, you will notice you have your assessments, and beneath you see where we wrote HTML and CSS material. If you click on this, you will see a downloadable document. This is the material you can use to study on HTML and CSS. And when we get to JavaScript, the JavaScript file will be provided as well. So let's follow me. Now, in the CSS folder, in order for us to have a place where we write our HTML code, we must have an HTML document. Because when your browser wants to read, it only reads your HTML file. That is what is being displayed to the user. So when you're creating your document or your project, you must create a landing page. Now, most of you will not understand why I'm naming this file index for now. But when we get to backend, where we'll be talking about the second version, which is Web 2, you will get to understand pretty well why your file, your first file, or your landing page of every website has to be named either index or home. But for now, we'll just be using it. You might not get the clarity. So once I press OK, I have the folder being file created. Now in the file, I will do the shortcuts. Which is come in here and press enter. Now that exclamation mark I just wrote is to use my IntelliSense to create a document. So inside there I can say H1. Welcome to CSS Fundamentals. So if I come to this three bar, click on it and run my document, the very minute I click on start, it will ask me what do I want to interpret this code. So I want for me a web app basically focusing with Chrome. So I'll click on Chrome and allow my Chrome to pop up. So you can see my running is my project is currently running. So this is my code. This is my display rather. This is the browser and the editor. So I'll give us some minutes for us also to practice this. So I'll wait for you guys to practice this. Give me a moment. Okay, let's proceed from where we stopped. Now, what is CSS? Let's go back to understanding what CSS is. As said earlier, CSS is a style sheet language that describes the presentation of an HTML document, meaning we use CSS to determine how CSS is being displayed or how HTML documents are being presented to the users. So when it comes to beautifying a website, a CSS is what we use. Now the word CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS describes how HTML elements are to be displayed on screen, paper, or in other devices. All of this we'll discuss in our first class and second class. Now CSS saves a lot of work. It can control the layout of a multiple web page all at once. All of this we'll go through them one after the other. Now why was CSS introduced? CSS is used to define styles for your web pages, including the design, layout, and variations in display for different device and screen sizes. Meaning, if you want to determine where items are being positioned on the web page, maybe something should be on the left, something should be on the right, something should be in between, something should be at the bottom, something should be at top. What we use for this arrangement, for a proper layout arrangement, is CSS. And it also determines how various items are being displayed. Now, CSS solved a big problem. HTML was never intended to contain tags for formatting or styling a web page. HTML was created to describe the content of a web page, like, meaning at the first generation of HTML, what HTML itself was designed for is for content to just display. It's not meant for beautifying. However, when tags like the font and color attributes were added to the HTML 3.2 specification, meaning during the time of the creation of HTML 3.2, two things was added, which is the font element and a color attribute, so that we can now style our displays, our content. So it started a nightmare for web developers. Development of a large website where font and color informations were added to every single page became a long and expensive process. It became more stressful for developers to build projects. So because of this, the Worldwide Consortium, the international body who is in charge of the web, created CSS. Now, CSS saves a lot of work. The style definition are normally saved in an external .css file. With an external style sheet file, you can change the look of an entire website by just changing one file. All of this we will get to it. So how does HTML work? When a browser reads a style sheet, it will format. That means it will use the CSS style that you wrote to determine it. That's why it said it will format the HTML document according to the information in the style sheets. That's the job. So what are the ways we can use to insert CSS? Basically, CSS has 4 ways. Among these 4 ways, it is only 3 you have power over as a developer. You only have power over the external, internal, and the inline. But there is the 4th one called the browser default. Let me show it to us. I will come to my code and I will come to my display. If I come to this display here, the one you're seeing here, I right click and I go to inspect in order for me to see the content. Now, if I select this H1 here, which is the one I wrote here, you will notice that there are some CSS declaration being made. Meaning by default, every browser has a way it has styled each and every element that has ever existed. Let me give you another scenario. Let's say I come here and I say A, which is to create an A tag. I press enter and I say hello. Now, if I refresh here, can you see the hello? So if I come to this inspect, let me take this inspect to the bottom. Sorry, I like it here. So I can change the docking side to the left, to the bottom, and what have you. So if I decided to toggle, let me return it back to the right. So let me just adjust a bit. Now, if I decide to select this A tag, you can see that there is a styling made that was defaultly being made by this browser. You can see it said the A tag WebKit at any link, color should be WebKit link, cursor should be pointer, and the text decoration should be underlined. That's the default value, which we call browser default settings. Meaning our browser by default has a styling it has done for this HTML. However, I can make changes I can readjust to suit me. And that's where your inline, internal, and external CSS comes in. Any question before I move further? Questions, please. Captain? Abiola? Ifi? I await your questions. Please, if there is no question, I would like to hear it. Just say no question so that we'll be aware. Am I the only one on this call?
One question.
Please, I would like to hear us so that you will not be the only one. I think it's high time I start pointing at people. I will ask you a question, or I will point you to ask a question. So everybody will be together. Don't sleep. So let's see how we create an inline CSS. First and foremost, let me come to the code base. I want to write multiple code. So I can come and say P Lorem Osborn. I'll create another H1. So let's say I say hello guys, and I'll close this and I'll refresh. Now beneath the hello guys, I'll put another Lorem Osborn. So this is another Lorem Osborn. If I refresh here too, I see my outcome. Now, let's say I come to this H1. I want to change, let's say, the color. All I need to do is to come to this H1 here, give it a space, and I'll just type color. Sorry, I will type the word, an attribute called style. So the very minute I say style, all I need to do is to specify the CSS property I want to use. For me, I would like to say color. If you could remember, every CSS comes with property and value. So if I say color, and I said I want it to be blue. Now, when I come here and I refresh, you will see that the color of this H1 is now color blue. The color has changed. Now this is based on the fact that I have altered the CSS, the styling of this H1, for me to change from the default settings to the one I gave you just now. Which means if I come here and inspect, I click on this. This was the default settings it has before. Now this is the new styling I gave to it. Can you see it? This was the browser default, but this is the new styling I gave. Any question? Okay, no question. I would like to ask some questions. My first question goes to Ifeanyi. Ifeanyi, are you there? Please, can you kindly unmute yourself? So, I would like you to unmute yourself, or you use the in-call messages. Now, what do we use to separate a CSS property from a CSS value? What do we use to separate a CSS property to a CSS value? I await your response. Fine. What do we use to separate a CSS property from a CSS value? It's if and underscore. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. The answer is not semicolon. Captain, please can you tell us?
A colon.
A colon, correct. It's a colon. This is it in between here. We use it to separate a CSS value from a semicolon. Now, what do we use to end a CSS declaration? What do we use to stop a CSS declaration?
A semicolon.
Correct. That's it. A semicolon. That's nice. Okay, let's continue. So what I just did here is what we call an inline CSS, and it can have multiple declaration because it ends with a semicolon. Now it's an indication that I'm done with this declaration. I can come in front of it and I will say text decoration underline. The very minute I say underline and I refresh here, can you see the 9 beneath it? We have created an underlining design. So I can give it multiple declaration. CSS declarations can be added, multiple, using this. Now, the problem this has, an inline CSS, this is inline, is that the styling I gave to it only affects that particular element. Meaning, this H1 is the only one being affected. If I want to give the same styling to another H1, I have to come here and do the declaration, which means I will come here and say style, and in between I will say color. Let's say the color is blue too, and I will come here, I will say text decoration underline, just the same way I did for the first one, before the second one can have its own effect. If I refresh, now you can see that both of them are having the same effect. So that's how that works. But what if we now have millions of H1? Does that mean we have to be styling them individually? There will be a problem to that regard. How can we do it that we can style it and it will affect across board? Every element associated with it will be affected. All I need to do is an internal CSS. Meaning, I can just come within the head section. Let's first remove this styling here. I don't longer need this inline. I will come to the second H1 and I will move its own inline as well. Then from here, I will say style. The very minute I say style opening tag and a style closing tag, I have created a local scope. Now in between here, I can write my styling. If I say H1, curly braces, now I'm creating a selector to capture all the H1 that exists. So in between it here, I can simply say color. So let's say the color should be, hold on, before I give it a color, I want you to see that there's no more styling. Can you see? On the display, there's no more styling. So if I come between here and I say color, I can say red. To the color, I will say red. Then I can come below. I will say text decoration. Let's say line through. If I do this and I refresh, can you see? I only did one declaration and every H1 that exists within this code base was affected. They all have that same styling, just because I did just one styling. So this eliminates the use of multiple styling for the same element. If you have the same element you want to style similarly, like the same way, you can just do it this way. So by doing this, we have the same style. Any question before I proceed? Questions, please. Captain, do you have any question?
Not for now, thanks.
Okay. So I've selected here and I've styled it, and every H1 here is affected. So what problem does this have? Let's say I come to my file explorer, I create a new file by clicking on this new file, and I created a file called about.html, and the about.html I wrote codes too about CSS. Then let's say I come in between the H1, in between the body, and I say H1 learn about CSS, and I come below here, I wrote a p tag, I say Lauren, I still come below here, I wrote a p tag, I say Lauren. Now I'm having multiple p tags. Now in order for me to go into this page, I need to activate this link, whereby when I click on it, it will take me to this page. All I need to do is to come to this H1. So this is about us page, and I can come in between here and I will say about.html. If I right click here, we have the about us page link, which means if I click on it, it will direct me into this file called the about.html. So once I click here now, I have this file. Now what you will notice is that the styling we gave it here, that's this styling, does not exist in the about us page, although it exists in the index. Let me create a link there. Let me come and say a tag index.html. Then I'll come here and I'll say home page. So I will have a link there too. So I can either refresh here or I come down here and refresh. So the same result. So if I click on home page here, now this styling we have here, making it red, making a line through, does not have an impact here in the other side, which is the about us page. So how can we make it have impact here? Obviously, it means we can write this internal, all of this. I have to come and rewrite it here. But what if we have tens of pages? Are we going to be doing it individually? To eliminate this problem, they created the external CSS, which is creating a CSS file. And how do we do that? I will come to my file explorer and create a file. So let's say I call this file style.css. Now it's not compulsory you name it style. You can name it anything, main, any name at all. But me, I would prefer to name it style.css. So if I press enter now, this is the style.css file. Now, all I need to do is to do all of my CSS here, and I link it across the pages where I need it. So this enables me to have one CSS file to manage my entire my entire website. So instead of me going to pages and individually style them, I can just use one CSS file that has a .css extension to do my styling across. So all I need to do here is to say h1, and let's say color now should be green, end with a semicolon, and let's say this one does not have a line through. Okay, let's put it again. Let's say text decoration, and this time around let's make it underline. So if I come to the home page and I remove this, I go to my home page, no more styling, but we have already styled it in our CSS. How come it is not taking effect? Now that's based on the fact that in our CSS here, in our HTML file, we need to link our CSS to it. How do we do it? All we need to do is to come here and say link, just like this. So once I say link, the next thing is to say rel. Now this rel means the link I'm about to create, what is its relationship with this file? That's what is the relationship of this link with this index.html. Without you writing this, your CSS will not work. So this rel will have something called style sheet. The very minute I say style sheet, I can then come here and say href. Now this href is for me to link this CSS file to this project here. To this index.html. So all I need to do is to call the file path, which is style.css. Now if I come here and I refresh, you can see that the styling is taking effect. So the next thing I need to do is to go to the about us page. Now this is our about us page. It is not having any effect. Can anyone tell me why is the coloring, that's the color I changed, the underlining I did, why is it not taking effect on the about us page, but it's taking effect on the home page, which is your index.html? Can anyone tell me the reason? Anybody?
Can we run the debug to find out?
No, we don't need to run the debug. I want you to see
I
the
don't know.
folder. Has not been linked. Yes, that's the answer. If I say has not been linked, that's because on our index page we have linked our CSS file, but in our about us page there's no linking of the CSS file to the about.html. So all we need to do is to come here and say link, just the same way we did it for the first one, and I will say rel, which means the relationship. Then I will say style sheet. Then in front here I will say href, I will say style.css. If I close this like this and I go to the about us page, this is the style. So the reason why it did not work was because it was not initially linked. Just the same way we link our HTML file, our index, we link the CSS to the index. In order for it to take effect on the about, we also need to link it. So this link is telling it that come and use this CSS file called style.css. Whatsoever styling that has been written there should come and make effect on our styling, on our about us page and the index page. So if I go back to the material, remember it was stated here that when a browser reads a style sheet, it will format the HTML document according to the information in the style sheet, which means we are using the CSS we are writing here to determine how our index and our about us page will look. And that's all. Any question? Any question? Captain, do you understand it now?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the structure. So you go to heads, and then in certain sense we bring a link REL, and then style sheets, and then href. Okay, got you. No problem. That's fine.
Are you practicing as we're doing? If I ain't, question. Okay. This second question has been answered. Now let's move ahead. In CSS, there's something we call the cascading order. Let me show you the impact of a cascading order. If you look at your code here, we have the CSS style, the external CSS. We are using it to determine how all our page look, both the about and the index. But what if in a scenario I have an index page that I have an index page styling, which is internal styling, and I also have an inline styling? What will take effect? If I come here now and I say style, now in between the style, let's say I say H1 and I say I just want only the color to be red, and I close this. Now by cascading order, the top priority is inline CSS, followed by internal CSS, Then lastly, external CSS, which means the very minute I do internal CSS, any external CSS I have will be override, which means it will no longer be effective on my styling. What do I mean? If I go to my home page now, because I have internal CSS here, my external CSS, that element, this styling I did, will override. You know, I always say color red, but here we have color green. So because we only capture the color, that will be the only thing affected here, meaning the color green here will no longer take effect on our index page, because we have a color specification as an internal CSS on this my document. If I go to the about, you can see that the about is still using the external, but when I come to the home page, which is the index.html, the color green, which is from the external, is no longer having effect on my code because it has its own specification. Now, what if I do inline? I will say style here, then here I will say color. Let's say I put orange. Let's say I put orange. The very minute I refresh here, can you see the difference? Now, this is happening because on the cascading order, let me show it to you. On the cascading order, internal inline styling is at the top priority of the cascading order, which means whenever you make any of this design, the very minute there's an inline, any other styling you did for that property will be override. The inline will be the one to take effect. That means in the cascading order, the inline has an higher priority more than the internal, the external, and the browser defaults. External override browser defaults. Internal override the external and browser default. And the inline override the internal, external, and browser default. So these are ways all of these things can take effect and make changes to our code. So this internal override the external, while this inline override both the internal and the external. That's our first choice. Secondly, there is a way we can disrupt this order. And the benefit of you disrupting this order is when you have multiple teams working on the same thing. Let's say we have different developers working on the same project. What can we do to make a difference? You see, in this style sheet, the one we have here, the one we said color should be green. Let's say I want a scenario whereby when my styling is made external, even if you make internal or inline, I still want that my external to take effect. All I need to do is to come here and say exclamation important. The very minute I put this exclamation important, it changes my cascading order, that this property color will automatically be at the top of the cascading order, which means if I refresh this code now, you can see that all the internal inline that I did is no longer effective, and that's because I made the external important. So this important disrupts the cascading order. Let's say I remove this and I refresh, it goes back to the way it was, and I come here, I do the internal CSS and I say exclamation important. The very minute I refresh this, can you see that this orange that I styled, which is the internal, which has an high priority than the internal and the external, has been override because I put important. So we use this important to disrupt our cascading order, so that when the one that is in the high priority is being declared, it will not take effect. The one with the important will take effect. So that's the job of this important. Any question? Any question? So to save the list, the most used CSS, the one you will use mostly, is the external CSS, because it helps you manage multiple pages at a go. So we no longer need this internal, but it is there. Sorry, this inline, it is there if you want to use it. We don't use this internal as well. Both of them are no longer needed ever since the invention of the external CSS. So if I refresh here, they automatically go to the effect we given here. So let's proceed. So we talked about the syntax, the property, the value. A CSS rule set consists of selectors and declaration blocks. This we'll discuss. The selector points to the HTML element you want to style. The declaration includes a CSS property name and the value separated by a colon. A CSS declaration block are surrounded by curly braces. All of this has been explained before. Meaning this is a selector, this P is a selector. Everything from here is called CSS declarations. And each declaration from here to here has two paths, the property name and the property value. Similarly, this one too is the property name and the property value. So that's the basic syntax in CSS. Now CSS has something we call selectors, other type of selectors. Now there are two major types of selectors that exist beyond you using the tag name. We also have what we call the inline selector, and we also have what we call class selector. Let me show you in practice. When you're using a tag name to capture a CSS in order for you to style it, you're dealing with what we call using tag name to capture, just like what you see here. But our CSS, or let's say our HTML, can have some attributes called ID or class. Let's take an example. Let's say I come to this H1, the one with hello guys, and I say I want to give it an ID, and I will call this ID let's say John, for instance. Now, this H1 has an ID called John. Please, I don't need this CSS anymore. Now, what this enables us to do is to style all the CSS, all the HTML that have the same ID or the same class, same way. Let's say I come to this paragraph at the top here too, and I say I want its own class, its own ID also to be John. If I come to my styling here and I say John, then curly braces, let's say I say I want the color to be let's say blue violet, and I also want the text alignment to be center, or let me take it to the right. Let's center it. I say center here. If I come here and refresh, you won't see any effect. Now, the reason why you're not seeing any effect is because this John I wrote here, it's being captured as an element. And there's no element in my code called John, because there's no HTML element called John. So how then can I capture this ID? All I need to do is to put an hash in front of it. So when you put an hash in front of it, you're telling it that it should go and look for any element that has the ID called John. That element, I want you to give it a color and give it a text alignment. So if I come here and I refresh, can you see? I've been able to group these two together and style them together just because I gave it an ID called John. That's why you're seeing this. Any question before I move further? I don't like the way this class is dull. Questions. Captain, question. Abiola, question. Ifine, question. Yeah, Captain.
There are no questions for now.
But do you understand the ID?
Not really.
So what is unclear? Let's break it down.
Yeah, just still trying to understand the entire CSS structure. You know, the best practices in CSS structure. Like I mean, from important all the way down. You know, why we use important, and why we should be careful why using important and all that, because CSS is a very dodgy area. It really takes time to understand. I'm not sure I'm really flowing so far. You know, the HTML was quite straightforward, but this CSS thing is taking a bit of time to link up everything you have said so far.
Okay, so your problem starts from the importance.
Yes, from that important area. Yes.
Okay, let me just put it like this. The job of the important is to disrupt the cascading order. That's all. Is to disrupt, meaning, first, do you understand what a cascading order means?
That's order of preference or order of importance. Cascading.
Yes.
Preference.
Meaning,
order.
Meaning, if you have internal, external, and browser, and inline, you do the same styling, you call the same property, and give them different value in CSS. By default, the inline has the highest priority, meaning it will automatically override the external and the inline. The very minute you decided to style an inline, it will override the internal and the external. If you style the internal, it will override the external. So in priority, inline automatically have an higher priority more than internal and external. Internal has a high priority over external, and the only one external has priority over is browser default. So meaning all of their styling will change based on the preference you give it. But what if in a scenario you have internal, you have external, you also have inline, but you want the external to override all? It should override both the internal and the inline. All you need to do is to give it a value called important. So the very minute I come here and I say important, the cascading order will be disrupted. Meaning the property that has the value important, regardless of the position where it is, whether it is internal, whether it is external, whether it is in inline, will automatically be at the top, which means important has an higher priority than inline, internal, and external. So that's the power of internal CSS. Sorry, the power of importance. It is used to disrupt the cascading order. Meaning at the top of the cascading order, important is the highest priority, followed by internal, followed by from the important, the next is inline, followed by internal, followed by external. Question. Captain, did I answer your question?
Yeah, interesting. So this your important is like executive order now.
Executive what?
Executive order.
Yes. To override all other laws.
I tell you.
So that's how it
Got you.
works.
Thank you.
So is there any other thing that is unclear? Do you now understand the ID? It's used for grouping multiple elements. Is used for grouping multiple elements. So the next on our agenda, after internal, after ID, is class. So let's say I come here to this paragraph here and I give it a class of let's say Mark, and I go to the About Us page. I gave this a tag, a class of Mark as well. I come to the index page. I gave this a class of Mark. Now, remember that the CSS is linked to both elements. So let's say I come to the styling and I say Mark, open brackets, and I say text decoration should be none, text transform should be uppercase, meaning I want everything to be capital letter, and let's say color too. I want it to be cyan. Now, remember I just said mark here. If I refresh, I won't see any effect. And that's because the only way, when we say mark, this mark is only looking for an element called mark. And an element called mark does not exist. So the only way we can style a class is to put a period, which we call full stop. If I put a full stop here now, meaning all the class in my code, regardless of where it is, in as much as it has the value of mark, give it all of these stylings. If I come here and refresh, can you see? Okay, let's change the cyan to red now, so it will be more clear. If I refresh, can you see? About us, Lauren here. I click here, can you see? We have the same effect across. Any question? Any question? Do anybody have any question? Okay. Abiola, any question?
Question, sir. No question.
So this is how we capture classes.
Let's use this concept to change fonts.
Font of what? Of an element?
Of any of the pages, or all the pages we have done so far. Let us. Sorry.
There's nothing we call font element. Or you call it font family. All you need to do is to say font or font family.
Okay.
Then the type of font you want to use, you can just name it there. Font family helps you capture multiple fonts. So it moves in an order. Let's say I select this Korea new, Korea and monospace. So what this simply means is, if the browser or the laptop you're using does not have Korea new, it should switch the font to Korea. And if it does not have Korea, it should switch to monospace. That's what it means. So in a aspect whereby one of these does not exist, this next one will use.
So is there no? Don't you have a font size there?
There's also font size.
I actually want to use class to effect change in font size.
Okay, let's see this font family first. So if I come here and I refresh, can you see that the font here has changed?
Okay.
The font changed because of this font family. And in a similar way, let's say I use frankly, gotcha, medium, and all of this. If I come here and I refresh, can you see that the font has changed as well?
Okay, good.
Now, if I want to increase or reduce the size, all I need to do is to say font size. So I can say 40 pixels.
Okay.
And if I refresh here, can you see how big they become?
Yeah, sure.
Because of the pixels I gave it. And I can also change what we call the font width. This one works with how bold it should be. So if I say I want it to be bolder and I refresh, can you see the boldness increased? And in similar way, there's something called font style. Then other you can make it italic and many other designs. So if I say italic, meaning I want it to slant. So if I refresh, can you see it slant a bit?
Mm-hmm.
So we do all of this using different CSS properties. There are tons of different CSS properties. It all depends on the one you want to use. So if I remove this, refresh, and back to the way it is, remove this, and refresh. Now if you notice, it is only those elements that have the same class that affect across board, and that's what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Questions? Do anybody have any questions? Okay, so this is how it works. Now the last thing I want to talk about CSS before we call today a day is commenting. Remember, we use comment to add documentation to our code. So in order for us to add documentation to our code, we can simply just come here. Let's say I don't want this font family anymore, and in a similar way I don't want to delete it, or I don't want this italic anymore. In a similar way I don't want to delete it. All I need to do is to go in front here, put / asterisk, then I will go to the end of where I want it. I will say asterisk /. This is how we comment. So if I come here and I refresh, can you see that the red color no longer takes effect? And that's because I comment out my code. So please be careful. If you don't write it properly, your code will not work. So if let's say I put it here now, I stir it like this, and let's say I did not put anything here. Let me remove this first. Let me remove everything, and I refresh. You can see it has the style. But the very minute I come and put one place now, anything from that place downward will be considered a comment, except we decide the ending point of our comment. Without the ending point of our comment, this thing will be showing us error, just like what you see. Let me give you another instance. Let's say I just want to do this text align alone, and I do / asterisk. You can see that from the / down to everything here has been commented out, and that's because we did not tell it to end. We didn't put the closing tag, we didn't put the closing comment character. So which means if I refresh here, can you see everything is no longer taking effect except I close it properly. Now everything is back to normal. If I refresh now, everything is back. So that's how we add comments in our code. So let's take an example of comment. I don't need this anymore. I can just comment everything out. Can you see? All of them will no longer take effect. which means if I click here, everything is back to browser default. So it is the way the browser knows it. That's the way it is showing it now. So the only thing I can do is to come to my index here. Yes, this index in particular. Now what I want to do is what we call group selection, grouping elements together. So how do I group multiple elements together? Let's say I want both my H1 and my P across board to have the same styling. So instead of me doing it individual, let's say I come here now, I say H1 color, I want it to be green, and I want a tag also, I want its own color to be green. If I refresh, both my A tag and my H1 across board is the same color. So instead of me writing them individually here, I can just say H1 comma A. This means all the A we have in our H1, I want it to have the styling. So if I remove all of this, that means I don't need to write it multiple times, and I refresh, I'll still get the same results. So this is how they work individually. Any question? Any question? So, with no further question, we have come to the end of the fundamentals of Java, CSS. Now, as the class proceeds, I would want you guys to practice all of these things. We will now be using both CSS and HTML together to start creating wonderful websites. And that will start from our next class. With this and more, I hope to see you in another class. Do not forget, assessments will be sent to you. I would like you guys to answer them smoothly and on time. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.